Hello and welcome to Pickleball Therapy, the podcast dedicated to your pickleball improvement. I am your host of this weekly podcast, Tony Roy. Hope you're having a great week. This podcast is part of the betterpickleball.com network of pickleball offerings that bring you all the resources you need to play amazing pickleball. This week on the podcast, I'm going to share with you some ideas about what to do with the advice you're undoubtedly getting out there, where you can stick that advice, if you will. And then the riff, I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about recent governing body information that's floating around out there. It's important big picture for our sport, so I want to talk about it for a little bit during the riff. This week's episode is brought to you by the Pickleball Summit. You want to make sure you join the Pickleball Summit July 14th through 16th. You can get your free ticket, and I'll see you all at the summit. There's some really good presentations at the Pickleball Summit. I've already been privy to several of them, and they are going to be outstanding. So I highly recommend you join us for that. And I want to share a shout out here. This is from our YouTube channel. Maybe you know, maybe you don't know that we have this on YouTube as well. So if you want to enjoy the podcast and get to see this smiling mug talking to you, feel free to go over there to Pickleball Therapy on YouTube. If you do go on there, please subscribe to the channel. Help us reach other players. This is from Alan. Alan's been a long-time listener, as you'll see it from his review and student. And it's so grateful. I'm so grateful, right, to be able to impact players like Alan and just help them with their journey. So Alan says, Tony, I've been listening to your pickleball therapy shows from the beginning. I know without a doubt that I'm a better player because of your podcast, but more importantly, a better person. Your presentations can be a benefit not only in pickleball, but in life in general. Keep it up, and thank you for your time you invest to create these podcasts. It's my pleasure, Alan, and everybody who enjoys these podcasts. And that's how we view not just the podcast, but how we view our relationship with pickleball. It's, pickleball is amazing, but pickleball is a part of a much bigger picture, right? That is us as human beings. And so, to the extent that we can translate from the pickleball court to our general life, whether it's, our improved physical condition, whether it's our improved mental understanding of things, all the better, right? So in this podcast, we try and share with you concepts that'll help you execute better on the court for sure, but also concepts that you can then translate outside the court and get benefits from that as well. So Alan, it's a pleasure to have you as part of our community. Before we jump into the podcast, I do want to let you know that he's my mentor in the mental game, Coach Pete, or Peter Scales is his formal name. Coach Pete is a amazing thinker about the mental side of sports. He's a trained psychologist, unlike me, and he also is a coach. He coaches tennis and pickleball, and so he's developed some really interesting ideas on the mental side of the game. The book Compete, Learn, Honor by him was seminal for me in my improvement mentally, and the concepts. Coach Pete and I are generally step in step in terms of our thinking about what's important, what's not as important in the mental realm. But Coach Pete has recorded a really good course, deals with why you play. So he has this concept called jazz. I'm not gonna spoil it, but it's really, really cool concept. And that course is up and available inside our Better Pickleball Academy. So if you go to the betterpickleball.com website, and I'll link it in the show notes, you just click on classes, go to Academy, you'll see Coach Pete's course there. It's winning the mental game in pickleball. Check that out. It's a really good way to get to know Coach Pete better and to learn some really good material for your mind. All right, let's dive into this advice thing. And this is a little bit of a tease from our upcoming book on the mental game, that it has to do with one of your superpowers. I'm going to have a sip of coffee here, clear my throat. So it's one of your superpowers that we talk about in the book. And it's some of these things that we talk about in the mental game, and this one is no different. When you first hear about it, it's just so obvious, right? You're like, duh, that's so, yeah, of course that makes sense. But, we forget when we're dealing with pickleball, playing pickleball, thinking about pickleball, sometimes we forget about one of our superpowers, which is our agency, right? And stated simply, it's your ability to make decisions for yourself, right? You have agency over yourself, and that includes almost everything, right? I mean, there are some things that are outside your control, but almost everything that involves pickleball is in your control. maybe a silly example, or not silly is not the right word, but maybe a simple example of it would be, you're going to play for 3 hours tomorrow, right? Did you have a glass of water before you went to bed last night? That's agency, right? That's you exercising your agency. There's a corresponding concept of intentionality, right? You use those two together and you have great results. But agency is really, really powerful, and we can use it in many more ways than we think. For instance, where we aim our shots, who we play with. I mean, there's all sorts of ways to use agency. But what I want to focus on in this podcast is how we use that agency to deal with advice, right? Deal with you go out to the court and everyone's got advice. So let's walk through a specific example and see how we can use agency in that situation. Because again, but because here's the thing: if you don't use your agency, now you're going to be beholden to whatever the latest piece of advice is that you happen to hear. So you know how it is. You go out to the courts, you're playing in a group setting, and at some point, the partner you're playing with or someone comes up and says, "Hey, you know what? You really need this particular shot. You really should work on this shot. You need this shot. It's going to be really important to your game," right? And you could also get this advice from YouTube, right? YouTube or someone at the courts works the same way. So the question is, what are you going to do now? You're going to start going down the rabbit hole, right? Are you going to basically start working on a random shot that someone just happened to feed to you during a session or that you just happened to come across on YouTube? It doesn't seem plausible, but it happens all the time, right? Think of the number of players out there who are just chasing shot after shot after shot. They heard something, they're chasing it. They heard something else, they're chasing it. Here's the thing, right? You can choose not to chase that shot that you got advised by someone at the courts, right? And I would suggest to you that you should always exercise your agency, right? Now, your ability to exercise your agency will grow the more you understand about pickleball. And if you want to think about it, you can think about it, like as a child or as a younger person, you had agency, right? But it might have been curtailed by your parents, but still you had some level of agency, right? But your agency, your ability to exercise that agency got better the older you got, the more knowledge you got, the more mature you got, the more perspective you gained, right? You were able to exercise the agency better. So going back to the advice, on the pickleball court, sometimes it feels like we should take the advice because we just don't know. Like we're not sure, right? So, well, that player is pretty good, so they must know what they're talking about, so I'm going to go chase this thing. Be careful with that. And also be careful with YouTube videos. And it's not that the YouTube video in and of itself is a bad video, right? It's just that it may not be what you need right now. And we've talked about this in prior podcasts, but you have to have an alignment between the thing that you believe you need, right? The shot or the strategy or whatever it is, right? And where you are. Those two things need to align in order for it to make sense for you to go down this path of chasing that thing. And YouTube videos, they can't possibly know exactly what you need, right? And the algorithm certainly doesn't know. It just knows you like pickleball, is going to feed you a video. So be particularly careful about that kind of thing. If you're not sure, what I recommend is think about like having a pickleball mentor, right? That's someone who you trust. You're welcome to use myself and CJ Johnson, my co-head coach over at Better Pickleball. We think a lot about what we bring you. We bring it in a way that we always are thinking about, is this going to help a player who sees this? Sometimes that costs us clicks. Objectively, you look at our channels, sometimes, we appear to quote unquote miss the mark because we're not getting, 60,000 views on a video in 2 days. But we're also not filling our video with stuff that we know the algorithm is going to like, right? The YouTube algorithm, and feed you. So it's a trade-off that we make. But if you want to use us as your mentors, we're happy to play that role for you. If it's not us, then you're going to be served by finding and identifying someone who can be your mentor until you develop the knowledge yourself, right? To make your own judgment calls as to whether that's something that you should take on or not take on. I would suggest erring on the side of not taking it on right now. So if you're not sure, right, when in doubt, don't do it, basically, is going to be the mantra here. There better be a good reason why you're going to go chasing this thing that someone at the court just happened to mention to you. If you're working with a coach, if you're working with, if you're a system member inside our pickleball system already, then you have work to do, right? So in those situations, the coach or the pickleball system are your mentor, right? So listen to what's in there and try and avoid the urge potentially, or the temptation, better word, of chasing some shot that someone mentioned to you or that you saw in another YouTube video. That's exercising your agency. That's you exercising control over your pickleball journey, and not allowing an algorithm-fed video or a random player at the court, even if it's a well-known player at the court, to unintentionally hijack your journey and put you on a path toward potentially even regression. I can tell you, there's many stories here in my local playing community of players who, end up chasing, fantastical shots that, and I mean fantastical, not in fantastic, but as in fantasy, fantastical shots, and end up hurting their games for, significantly hurting their games, which is unfortunate, right? Because I know that those players are putting in the work. They are earnest in their desire to play better. They've been at the game for a bit, and it's not unreasonable to expect to play better, but because of detours here and there, right, they've been impaired in their progress. And I'll say this in terms of agency: if they understood the risk that they were taking and the downside that they were going to potentially take, and they still took it, that's fine. That's agency, right? That's them exercising their agency, and no problem. But I would suggest to you that oftentimes what ends up happening is players end up chasing things not because of an intentional decision by them, not because of an exercise of their agency, but because they have, forgone their agency, or they have basically waylaid their agency, and just chased whatever was proposed. So consider in your journey, again, be cautious of new advice that you're getting. There are no magic bullets out there, or silver bullets. There are no magic potions or silver bullets out there that are just going to automatically change your game with, adding the shot. You're going to be, you're a 5 all of a sudden. That's just not how it works. And so if you're working on something that's fundamentally sound, and again, you have a mentor that's working with you, continue doing that and resist the temptation to just jump from thing to thing to thing. And the better you get at exercising this agency superpower that you have, the better you'll feel about everything, because you're not going to be running around chasing things out there. So hopefully you enjoyed that little snippet from the book. That agency superpower, we explore more in the book. It's just so powerful to be sort of reductive about it. But it is a very powerful characteristic that you have. And the better you use it, the better you'll play, and the better you'll improve, actually, because you won't be going down all these potential dead ends or circular paths that aren't going to get you where you want to go. All right. In the riff, I want to talk about governing bodies, USA Pickleball, the UPA, UPAA. There's 2 of them, I guess. So we're going to talk about that. Before we get into the riff, I mentioned Coach Pete's course in the Academy, but we also have several other courses in there already, and we have several other courses that are joining them in the not-too-distant future. Unforced errors, for instance, have been very popular with many players have looked at that one to help them solve their unforced errors. Low surprise, we have a Beat the Banger module or class in there. That hasn't had quite the success that I thought it was going to have. Let me know in the comments if you're on YouTube, or you can send me an email. My email, Tony@betterpickleball.com. Is it the title Beat the Bangers? Is that confusing? Because we try and come up with titles that players will understand, but maybe that's off the mark. I don't know. Maybe it should be like Outsmart or Outplay or something like that. So let me know what you think about that title in somewhere wherever you can tell me. All right. Let's talk about governing bodies. And why is this important? This is not just an academic conversation about governing bodies. Governing body of our sport is extremely relevant for several reasons. And it should be relevant to all of us, including me and you, anybody who loves pickleball. when you think about a sport and its growth, you want some amount of certainty, right? You want some amount of comfort that there is a governing body that is responsive to players and is looking at steward of the sport, right? Looking out for the sport. And what you don't want is confusion, right? You don't want like doubt, certainly not in the minds of the those who are not quite as imbued in pickleball. And I'll give you an example. Let's say you want like some courts to get developed, right? You want some courts in your area. You want to be able to go to your local community governing body, and if necessary, for instance, you want to be able to say, I have the plans from USA Pickleball. It's a governing body, and everything's set, and there's no questions, right? What you don't want to do is have a situation where you're at the meeting and you're trying to talk about it, and they're like, "Wait a minute, did you say USA Pickleball? But what about this UPAA that I've been reading about? That's the governing body, right?" Now you have confusion in the mind of a non-pickleball heavy person, right? Someone who's kind of peripherally aware of it. Now what do they do? And it's the same thing when you think about like, sort of mainstream interests, meaning like, sponsorships and things that can help grow the sport. If you're the CEO of a company, right, or the chief marketing officer, and you're trying to decide whether you're going to come into pickleball, who are you going to bank? Who are you going to back? Are you backing, team A or team B in this governing body thing? So I would suggest that is USA Pickleball perfect? I don't really think that is. So neither is USA Pickleball. It's just like everything else in life, right? There's no perfect thing. Are there things that they could do better? Of course there are. Are there things that I could do better? Things that you could do better. That's just the nature of the beast. But overall, big picture, has USA Pickleball carried out its mission? Is it a steward of the sport? Is it trying to grow the sport? Is it, what's its motivation? I think it checks all the boxes, right? Plus, it's been our governing body for going on. I think it's 40 years now. At least since '84. I know I think it's when it got incorporated. So basically, you're talking about 40 years of governing the sport. You're talking about the organization that has brought us here, and the organization that USA Pickleball is for the United States, right? For the country, but they do work with trying to help get it into the Olympics, right? With the international body and things like that. So it's important for us to have some consistency with our governing body and some certainty that there's not confusion out there. I would suggest right now anyway, the UPAA, I think it is the one that they're trying to make the governing body. That's an effort by the PPA and the MLP owners. They're the ones that set up UPA as best we can tell from the information. But the UPA, more questions than answers right now. And I think before we go pivoting governing bodies, there needs to be more soul searching in terms of what's the reason we're trying to switch, and also what are the safeguards that are in place. Because thus far, USA Pickleball, has done the work, and there's no indication that USA Pickleball is not able to continue doing the work in the way that's best for our sport. And I'll tell you, at the end of the day, that's what it's all about. It's all about, protecting the sport and allowing as many persons who choose to come over and engage in this awesome physical activity that's helped so many players throughout the country and more throughout the world. All right, so that's this week's podcast. Hope you enjoyed the podcast. As always, if you have a minute to rate and review it, please do. If you're on the YouTube channel, please consider subscribing to the channel. It helps us reach other players who, just like you, may benefit from the content in this podcast. And as always, share with your friends. Remember, if you enjoyed the podcast, they probably will too. I hope you have a great week, and I look forward to seeing you in the next episode of Pickleball Therapy.